Very much. It's a pleasure to be in Toronto. Right, so I'm talking on isometric torus sections in positive curvature. And maybe I start with an example that sort of demonstrates how far one can go. So we look at the torus action on a sphere, and now the sphere has dimension 2 to the d minus 2. It acts by orthogonal transformations, right? And you can find an action. There's an action. So example. There's an action such that for all h in the torus, every fixed point, the fixed point component has 2 to the d minus 2 h. So the fixed point component has dimension less or equal than 2 to the d minus 1 minus 2. So the dimension, all fixed point components have less than half of the dimension, right? And now, well, that's an example on the sphere, nothing wrong with it. But what you can do now is take out the principal orbit or tubular neighborhood of a principal orbit and double the manifold. Right, so then there's no way of ruling out that such an example has positive curvature with current technique, right? So current techniques do not suffice to rule this example out. And of course, you can, in the example, you can keep doubling, right? So you take out in the new example, take another principal orbit, double again. So you can make the Euler characteristic as big as you like. And so all fixed point components will have dimension less than n over 2, right? So they don't need to intersect. Frankel doesn't give you any contradiction. So the different components sort of don't communicate with each other, and there's nothing wrong with it as far as the techniques go. All theorems are sort of satisfied, right? And so without doing without establishing new techniques, which of course would be nice, but it's hard to do. There are sort of 3 ways to get around this problem. So 3 ways to circumvent this. 3 ways to circumvent the problem. So the first way would be go for inequalities. That don't care about different components. So if you want to bound the Euler characteristic from below, for example, then you don't care. The second would be make reasonable topological assumptions on top of symmetry assumptions that rule this out. the third, and that's what I'm mostly talking about today, is just make the symmetry degree 1 higher, then this problem goes away, right? So assume the symmetry rank, so, or let's just say rank of the isometry group is larger or equal to log 2 n. Then this problem goes away, right? So there it's a little bit below, right? So it's 1 below, but if you assume 1 more, then you can do it, right? And so, as I say, that will be the main content of the talk. But let me first talk a little bit about the other 2 approaches, which we have been pursued by us also in different work. So part 1. There's the following theorem. So if we have a from last year, it's preprinted out from last year. So we have a T5 action acting on a positively curved manifold, effectively and we assume that the sectional curvature is positive and M is oriented. Then every fixed point component of T5 has a rational cohomology of SF, so every fixed point component FF, SF, CPF, 2 or HPF over 4. So one of the classical examples. And so this has been improved recently by a PhD student of mine, Jan Nienhaus. You can replace T5 by T4. So you actually have 4 torus is enough. And its examples show that you need at least 3 torus, right? So, I mean, there's one of the problems. I keep saying that in every talk. That's why I almost get don't want to anymore. One of the problems in positive curvature is that there are very few examples. So in dimension above 24, there are no known examples except for the rank 1 symmetric spaces and coverings. And but the Wallach flag in dimension 24 has a 2 torus action which fixes a 6-dimensional Wallach flag. So that doesn't satisfy the conclusion. But if you have a 4 torus, then for sure it cannot happen anymore, right? Okay, and as a corollary, you get a corollary. So if you have a two-dimensional manifold with positive curvature, even-dimensional manifold with positive curvature, and the rank of the isometry group is larger or equal to 4, then the Euler characteristic is positive. All right, that's sort of an example where you go for inequalities, and then you only need a fixed torus dimension, right? So a 4 torus. I mean, I should say that before that there were no results where you only could prove such a thing for a fixed torus dimensions, the dimensions of the torus always depended on the dimension, right? So you needed to go up with the dimension at least, yeah, in dimension 4n you could deal with logarithmic things by results of Kennard and Ammann. All right, so for the second point, I mentioned yeah, maybe one theorem from yeah, also from last year, improved by Nienhaus. So because of Nienhaus result, you can cut off one dimension again from the torus. So suppose we have positive curvature. So Kmn has positive curvature. It's oriented. And we assume now, we make a topological assumption. So the odd Betti numbers of Mnq are 0 for 2i plus 1 less than n over 2. So on the first half of the cohomology ring, we have no odd Betti numbers. I mean, in the even dimensional case, no odd Betti numbers. In the odd dimensional case, no odd Betti numbers in the first half of the cohomology ring. So then we assume that the rank of the isometry group is larger or equal to 6 if n is even, or 7 if n is odd. Then you actually get is rationally equivalent. So this is rationally equivalent to a sphere, Cpn over 2, Hpn over 4. So that's right. So in principle, yeah, those are of course good results, but that's not what I'm going to talk on today. So the only issue is here, of course, you make an additional topological assumptions, right? So the odd Betti numbers are 0. Without that, you cannot really do anything. So in particular, I'm talking about even dimensional manifolds today. I mean, if the odd Betti numbers are 0, then it's known that the one skeleton, you don't know yet what it is, but the one skeleton then is automatically connected, right? So that's one of the main issues today. All right, so yeah, but so the main result of today is the following. So we look at we were interested in even dimensional manifolds, so n is even. We have oriented, and we have positive sectional curvature, and we assume that we have a isometric torus action on it, effective. And now the assumption is that n is less than 3 times 2 to the d minus 1 minus 2. And strict inequality should hold for d larger than 5. Okay, I explain. I mean, of course, you can just say strict inequality. I explain in a minute why you care about that you have equality for d less than 4, but it will become clear why. why we make it a little bit more complicated. So then the conclusion is there's a rank 1 symmetric space. Space M hat n, also of dimension n, such that first the Euler characteristic is the same. Second, the cohomology ring of the rank 1 symmetric space injects into the cohomology ring of Mn. I mean, this is pretty trivial if the rank 1 symmetric space is a sphere, but otherwise you sort of know that there's, for example, if it's CPN, you know that there's an element in degree 2 such that all powers up to the maximal power are non-zero. And C, that's a more geometric property. So for all involutions, iota in the torus, the fixed point set has at most 2 components. Okay, let me, okay, and if equality holds, and if there are 2, the dimensions add up to n minus 2m, where 2m is a degree in which h star m hat is generated. Okay, that's a bit technical. So I mean that's a well-known property for involutions on symmetric spaces. They can only have 2 fixed point components, and if they have 2 fixed point components, their dimension adds up to n minus 2 on a CPN, n minus 4 on a HPN, well, in case of the Cayley plane is included, so to 8 on a Cayley plane, right? Okay, so that's the main result, and so what we are, so the main one of the main problems is to show that the one skeleton is connected. So I'll just call it M1. So these are all points in the manifold such that the dimension of the orbit is 1-dimensional. equals to 1, right? So that's what we can do under these symmetry assumptions, and that sort of relates to the title, right? So it's an analysis of the one skeleton, and then we kind of know how each connected component looks like. It looks exactly like the corresponding connected component in the rank 1 symmetric space. But before that, I should say something. So is connected. Is connected. Yes. So thanks. Yes, I should also say in the theorem for d equal to 2, 3, and 4, the dimension bound is optimal. For d larger than 5, we don't know because we run out of examples that could sort of give us a check on whether things are optimal, right? So for d equal to 4, we go to up to dimension 22. And in dimension 24, the first new example shows up. So it has symmetry rank 4. It's a Wallach flag, right? And the same with dimension for 3 in dimension 12, the Wallach flag shows up. And okay, for 4, you have the 6-dimensional Wallach flag, right? I should also say that for d less or equal than 3, the theorem is basically no. I mean, there's maybe a small thing in dimension 10 that it's rationally equivalent to rank 1 symmetric space and not just. So that's due to Groves-Searle or Xiang, and then there's an important work of Ammann and Kennard. Manuel Ammann and D. Kennard. So one could actually say up to dimension 16, things are more or less known. There's only small additions here. Okay, so yes. So, but the main problem is to show that the one skeleton is connected, and this example shows that somehow, at least in these sort of dimensions, you cannot drop one dimension from the symmetry assumption, right? Because then you have these examples, and at least, I mean, nobody can construct positively curved metrics on these guys, but at least it's clear that the techniques completely collapse, right, in these dimensions. So you cannot do anything, right? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, let's maybe sketch the proof that the one skeleton is connected. Is connected. All right, so so step 1 is At each fixed point, P of the D torus, we find 3 linear independent involutions. Iota 1, iota 2, iota 3, such that the fixed point component iota I at P has dimension at least n/2. So that's basically a lemma on error correcting codes, right? Okay, and that actually fails if equality holds. So that first step fails if equality holds. So and in dimension 22 and 10, you need to do something else. So there are sort of some extra arguments in these dimensions. Since they are so small, it works, but that's why it fails for larger dimensions. So the very first step goes wrong. I mean, this is not very difficult to prove that under these symmetry assumptions, you can find these 3 linear independent involutions. And then, so the strategy is as follows, right? So assume M1 is not connected. Right, so the one skeleton is actually not connected. So then choose 2 fixed points. P1 and P1 and P2 in different components. Right, so, and then you just take, you look at the fixed point component M iota I at P1. And the fixed point component of M, let me call it sigma I or sigma 1 at P2, right? So here you have 3 involutions. These are maybe different, sigma 2, sigma 3. Here you have iota 1, iota 2, iota 3. And so they both have dimension at least n/2, so they intersect, right? So they must intersect. And now if they intersect, then the intersection contains again a fixed point. By Frankel, M iota 1 intersected M iota 2 and sigma 1 is not 0. P2 is not 0, and we can find a fixed point P3 in there, right? And now what's clear then that either M iota 1 or M sigma 1 intersects 2 fixed point components of M1, right? So this implies either M iota 1 or M sigma 1 intersects 2 fixed point components. of M1. Okay, and that's basically the start. That's what gets you going, right? So now what follows? So let's assume it's M iota 1, right? So let's assume it's this one, right? So we argue by induction on the dimension, right? So by induction on the dimension, the kernel of the action of TD on M iota 1 is one-dimensional. I mean, okay, you can use a choice such that it cannot be bigger dimensional by choosing these manifolds as large as possible. And it has to be one-dimensional because otherwise it would follow from the induction assumption that the one skeleton of the submanifold is connected, right? And then it can certainly not intersect two connected components of M1, right? So always, and this has to be fixed by a whole circle, not just by an involution. And now you keep doing this, right? So you keep constructing smaller dimensional manifolds, and that's why you have these three involutions at the beginning to play with. So the strategy is then strategy construct smaller and smaller fixed points components of subgroups. Intersecting two components. Two components of M1. Of this one skeleton, right? So now, all right, so I mean, yeah, I don't want to go into the details. I mean, the details are a bit complicated because we really pushed this to the limit, right? So, I mean, we really relaxed our assumptions so far as we could. And then there are sort of lots of exceptional cases. If you make the symmetry one higher, then the strategy works very well and you can easily arrive. So, I mean, but even in this case, you arrive at the following situation. So one arrives at the situation this way. One finds MH intersecting two components. Of M1 such that H is three-dimensional. I mean, and so the manifolds in practice are always only fixed by an involution, but somehow if they are fixed by two involutions, then or by 3 linear independent evolutions, then you can be sure that they are actually fixed by a 3 torus, or you get a contradiction to your induction assumption. So this way you get it 3-dimensional. Now, if H would be 4-dimensional, the contradiction would be perfect, right? Because then this fixed point component is then the fixed point component of a 4 torus inside some other submanifold, and then it has the cohomology of a rank 1 symmetric space, and you would be done, right? So contradiction arises. Since the odd Betti numbers of BH are 0. I mean, that follows because it actually has a rational cohomology of a rank 1 symmetric space. And whenever the odd Betti numbers of MH are 0, it's known that this one skeleton is connected. And then there's no way that MH can intersect 2 components of the one skeleton of M1. All right, so, but even with a 3-dimensional case, so if it's 3-dimensional, if dim-H is equal to 3, you can, one can get similar conclusions unless the dimension of MH is less, yeah, let's be generous. I mean, n over 5, we can actually do a little bit better. So the dimension has to drop at least by a factor of 5. Otherwise, we can actually deal already with the 3 torus, and the 3 torus does all the job. So if the fixed point component of the 3 torus has 1/5 of the dimension of the total space, then we actually know that it is already the fixed point component is a rank 1 symmetric space. So then the dimension has dropped by 5, and you basically then analyze the situation once more and see that you can get down one more time, right? So you can actually repeat the step one more time, right? So in this case, repeat the strategy. One more time until you get to a 4 torus. Yeah, it's again a little bit easier said than done. There are some exceptional cases which cause trouble, and they again appear because you make sort of these, yeah, you really want to push it to the limit so that the result is optimal in these low dimensions, right? Yeah, but otherwise this strategy works very well. All right, so yes. Oh, okay. So that sort of explains one part of the result. Well, it explains why it's the one skeleton is connected. So the next important thing one needs to show that every codimension 2 torus and this is only a problem in low dimensions, only has fixed point components of type SN CPF over 2 HBF over 2 HBF over 4. So I mean, if the torus is large, if D is larger than 6, a codimension 2 torus has then at least dimension 4, then it's automatic, right? But in lower dimensions, so for example, if D is equal to 4, you need to actually show this for a 2 torus, right? So every 2 torus actually fixes already something which is rank 1 symmetric. So that uses again sort of similar techniques. So it's for those who know the connectedness lemma and things like that, and some ad hoc tricks that come up, right? So so in large dimensions, this is for free, as I said, and then one can, yeah, that's maybe something I should explain since I explained the one skeleton, and since one skeleton appears in the title. Okay, so the graph of M1. Yeah, that's something we defined in previous work already, precisely designed for this situation, right? So you have every codimension 2 torus has sort of fixed point components which are symmetric. Then you can assign a graph to the one skeleton. So the vertices of the graph are fixed point components. And you connect 2 vertices. If they lie in a fixed point component, in a fixed point component of a codimension 1 torus. Right, so you have 2 fixed points. So then you might find a codimension 1 torus that connects them. And so then you assign a graph to these vertices, right? I mean, and these components, this might be much higher dimensional, you don't know. All right, and if you find another codimension 1 torus, then you make an, if there are 2 such, if there are L such codimension 1 torus, codimension 1 tori, you make L connections. Right, so it could be there's not just 1 torus that connects them, but 2 torus. And then you put the weight. These things are assigned with a weight, so that's sort of basically an element from the dual space. So Wi is in the dual space of the Lie algebra of the torus. And the kernel of the weight is exactly the Lie algebra of the codimension 1 torus, right? So that's So you put a weight on these things. And now in this situation, what you can say is that the graph looks very, very simple. Yeah. I forgot to say. If the yeah, I should add this. Okay, to be maybe I shouldn't. Okay, so if CODEM one component is of HP type, you make two connections. So sort of if the components of HP type, it's sort of worth two connections instead of one connection. All right, so but then the picture is very simple. So you sort of have two vertices with the same weight. That can happen, right? But then the graph looks very simple. You sort of have k vertices, and every vertex is connected with every other vertex, and the number of connections is exactly the same. Right, so that's exactly what it is. So you have exactly m connections. There are exactly m connections between any two vertices. Right, so the way you see that is, so you look at, suppose this connects to here, this connects to here, then you look at the codimension 2 torus that is sort of given by intersecting the weights. That's a rank 1 symmetric space, and then in this rank 1 symmetric space, you know there's a codimension 1 torus that gives you the other connection, right? So you always know that there's another connection, and then by doing the counting correctly, you see that the number of connections is actually the same in all situations. So you basically have this picture that you have these various components. And now the Euler characteristic of the manifold, that's then easy to see, is then equal to n over 2m plus 1. So you can actually compute the Euler characteristic of the manifold from this graph in a very easy way. So that's something we did already. And now, yeah, so yeah, so if m is equal to 1, 2, or n over 2, then we have the Euler characteristic. We have here of mn is equal to here of m of a cross, right? And okay, so there we use again, well, we did sort of prove by ourselves that that's automatically the case if every codimension 3 torus has a cohomology of a rank 1 symmetric space, and this actually holds, except for the Cayley plane, which you actually which you don't want to exclude. But then there's another result of Jan Nienhaus that actually shows that codimension 2 torus is enough as long as the torus is 5-dimensional. So Jan Nienhaus showed m is less or equal to 2 if if the two torus, if D is larger or equal to 5, and the Euler characteristic is not equal to 2. So you at least have, you have something to go for. So, so he actually managed to get by with codimension 2 tori. We had before basically as a condition that was also used, that we still use in the other parts of the paper, that for every codimension 2 subgroup, you know that the fixed point component is a rank 1 symmetric space. And then using this and a little bit more information, we could also recover this result, so that m is less or equal than 2. But yeah, that at least finishes up the computation of the Euler characteristic. And to get the embedding, one needs to do a little bit more work. But yeah, let me stop here.